Music collaboration software that works over the internet is a software challenge that has not been fully tackled. I know this because I'm a musician and I've been wanting to collaborate with people for a long time. It's hard to find the right software. On today's internet, there are people who are collaborating intensively on programming projects, journalism, artistic projects, but the tools for collaborating specifically on music have not yet become popular. It is hard to find the right tool that you can use to collaborate with other musicians. Blend.io is a social music collaboration tool, a GitHub for musicians, and I've been using it myself. I enjoy it tremendously, so I wanted to have a guest on the show, Alan Grow, who joins the show to talk about how to build this social version control system for musicians. We talk about how to make digital audio workstations interoperable, as well as where music is headed. This was a very enjoyable show because I'm a musician. All of the music on this show is stuff that I've written, and it was a real treat to talk to somebody who really understands a problem space and is trying to tackle a problem space that is quite important to me. It's a piece of software I'm really happy to see in the world. So I hope you enjoy this episode as much as I did. Indeed Prime flips the typical model of job search and makes it easy to apply to multiple jobs and get multiple offers. Indeed Prime simplifies your job search and helps you land that ideal software engineering position from companies like Facebook or Uber or Dropbox. Candidates get immediate exposure to top companies with just one simple application to Indeed Prime. And the companies on Prime's exclusive platform message the candidates with salary and equity up front. Indeed Prime is 100% free for candidates. There are no strings attached. Sign up now and help support Software Engineering Daily by going to Indeed.com/SEDaily. That's Indeed.com/SEDaily if you're looking for a job and want a simpler job search experience. You can also put money in your pocket by referring your friends and colleagues. Refer a software engineer to the platform and get $200 when they get contacted by a company, and $2,000 when they accept a job through Prime. You can learn more about this at Indeed.com/prime/referral. That's Indeed.com/prime/referral for the Indeed referral program. Thanks to Indeed for being a continued sponsor of Software Engineering Daily. If I ever leave the podcasting world and need to find a job once again, Indeed Prime will be my first stop. Alan Grow is an engineer working on Blend.io. Alan, welcome to Software Engineering Daily.
Thanks, Jeff.
I'd like to start by congratulating you on a very cool product that I have been using, which is Blend, and it is like a GitHub for musicians. I am a musician myself, so I have enjoyed using this. Can you explain just at a high level what Blend.io is?
It is a music collaboration platform.
Okay. And I also just want to say I had the idea for Blend a year ago. I know a lot of people have had this idea, and you were already working on Blend at that time. But I just want to say it is exactly what I wanted out of this like collaboration tool. It's basically I don't know. It's really cool to find out that this thing actually existed. It's like a musical collaboration tool with Dropbox as the version control system. And this is the product that I have been wanting to use. So getting into like the technical aspects of it, the way that people write electronic music, and listeners may not know because most listeners are software engineers, they may or may not work with music. The way that electronic music is made is with a digital audio workstation. And each of these digital audio workstations are a kind of walled garden. It's almost like you have a bunch of different companies that are releasing their own versions of Photoshop, except it's for music. So that's where I want to start. How has the number, there's all these different digital audio workstations. How did you look at that problem when you were sitting down and starting to create Blend?
In terms of the fragmentation?
Yeah, exactly. Like, how are you going to tackle that fragmentation thing?
Well, I think it was fairly obvious from early on that a few DAWs were going to be really important So I think Blend launched with Ableton Live and has added support for other DAWs just sort of as we went, as people asked for them. And it's fairly easy for us to expose collaboration for a particular DAW. So I think at this point we support, a dozen or more different DAWs.
And is there interoperability between? So if I make a song in Ableton and I save it as an Ableton version, is there compatibility between that Ableton file and GarageBand or FL Studio?
Not in those specific cases, but there is actually some cross-DAW integration that we've built. A lot of artists like to just, for a variety of reasons, publish their projects as stems. So for listeners, stems are just basically like if you have a 4-track song, vocals, guitar, drums, and then maybe some keyboards or something, you would have 4 different WAV files, all the same length. And that lets you basically, transform one of those instruments or voices at a time. So a lot of artists like to publish stems projects just because of the simplicity of it. If you publish a stems project on Blend, you can actually pull that stems project as an Ableton Live session. So we create an Ableton project for you on the fly and drop in all the tracks and set the markers and everything. So it's basically ready to start remixing.
Now, do most of these digital audio workstations, these DAWs, do these have a way to export your entire song in WAV files? Because WAV is obviously an interoperability layer that you could have.
I would say probably most DAWs, just because of the nature of creating music, can bounce the session to WAV files.
Okay. Yeah, my experience is you have to do it track by track, which is pretty frustrating. Because I've been trying to. I'm an FL Studio user. I've been trying to work with friends who are mainly Ableton users over the years, and it is always a headache.
That particular combination is pretty painful. and we don't have a lot of tooling to make that part of it easy, although those are 2 project file formats that we have actually a lot of info on. Ableton, it turns out, is just compressed XML. So it's a very open format, actually. FL Studio is a binary format, but it actually they're pretty open with giving specs to people. So we have the specs for .FL Studio files, and we can parse what plugins are used and things like that.
FL Studio is a much older project, right?
I believe so. Yeah. I don't know exactly the origins of it, but it used to not be called FL Studio for...
It was Fruity Loops.
Reasons. Exactly. And then...
Fruity Loops. Great name for a product. I started using it as Fruity Loops. I love that name. So why wasn't MIDI the thing that could be used to effectively collaborate between these digital audio workstations? MIDI is this, musical input digital something, but it's basically like you can write something on a keyboard and it's in this MIDI format, which is just like a transposition or a composition format that you could transpose to any instruments. Why didn't MIDI become like the standard?
Well, MIDI is a really important standard. As a digital musician, you've got, like all these different devices, and they talk via MIDI, and the MIDI standard is actually still getting extended. Blend's parent company, Rolly, has pushed for this expressive MIDI extension that allows you to do polyphonic pitch bend. So with just the standard MIDI, you can only really bend, one note or all the notes basically by the same amount. But Rolly has hardware that lets you actually physically bend multiple notes in different directions at the same time. So they released another extension to that. So there are people still working with the MIDI spec, and there's a standards body, and I think it's a really good, it's a really nice, simple protocol for a lot of things. I think it, for musicians, it doesn't quite define enough for you. If you just open a MIDI file, like Windows sound.mid or what, one of those. It's it's going to be played with default instruments, and it's just going to sound really just kind of old school and dry. And musicians, digital musicians these days rely on a lot of plugins
and samples.
And samples, exactly. And so MIDI by itself, it's like, it's not enough to get, a real production out the door. You're going to have to use other things.
So Blend, for people who haven't seen it, it's when you open it up, it looks kind of like a Facebook feed, except instead of posts, there are these different songs. People can collaborate on different songs in these feeds. In each of these songs, you can pull it, you can push to it, kind of like a GitHub repository. So what is the workflow, the typical workflow for a group of people that are collaborating on a song on Blend?
The typical workflow, I mean, it kind of depends, but the typical workflow is really, someone has an initial idea and puts it out there. I mean, it's just like code, right? Like, you don't sort of collaborate on the version 0.1. Usually one person writes that, and then other people see the potential and say, here's a pull request. Well, Blend has the same sort of thing. You see a project that you like on Blend, there's a pull button, which basically forks that project into your Dropbox where you can modify it, and then you can publish updates in your own lineage to that project. So in terms of how that collaboration actually works between the people, it kind of depends. Like, sometimes people are doing a back and forth collaboration. It's like you and your friend, so they'll fork your project and they'll publish an update to it, and then you'll fork their fork of the project and publish updates to it, and then it just sort of goes on, back and forth like that. All those versions in between, the intermediate versions that you're still working on, are still there, but basically it's a back and forth collaboration that you would see in the lineage in that case. But other collaborations are different too. I mean, I could give you some other examples.
Well, sure. I mean, let's one thing I'm really curious about is the Dropbox tooling that you had to build for version control. I mean, in terms of like different workflows, I'm sure you could have as many workflows as people have for collaborating in GitHub repositories. I mean, all the different companies I've worked at have had different workflows for how the programmers on their team collaborate with a repository. So what is the tooling that you had to build on top of Dropbox to turn it into a musical version control system?
I mean, it really, Dropbox was kind of the easiest way to roll out an MVP of the idea of Blend. It meant that we didn't have to solve the file synchronization problem and all the cross-platform problems and cloud storage and all that sort of stuff. We didn't have to solve those problems up front, which I think doing that stuff from scratch would have probably pushed the launch of Blend out like a year or something. Instead, it was like, okay, everyone has Dropbox. Most musicians have Dropbox, so let's just use that and build something that sort of sits on top of that storage layer. So, I mean, in terms of how we use Dropbox, it's not terribly complicated, really. Basically, you sign up for Blend. One of the first things that happens is we ask to use a folder inside of your Dropbox for Blend projects, and you say okay, and then when you're publishing files and stuff on Blend, you put your projects inside of that Dropbox folder, and then you hit publish on Blend. And when you hit publish on Blend, they get copied from your Dropbox folder into sort of official place, in the cloud. And that official place is where other people pull it from. But basically, all the storage stuff at this point is it works off of Dropbox. And I actually have an announcement related to that that you and other Blend users might be interested in. We're very close to replacing Dropbox.
Oh, wow.
Something better.
Wow. That's cool. So okay. So the current workflow is like where I upload my song, it goes into my Dropbox, and then also gets copied to the Blend servers somewhere so that if I were to delete my own version of the song on my Dropbox, it would still exist in the file history lineage of Blend.
Right. It would still exist there, but it'd be inaccessible to other Blend users.
Interesting. So, are you saying that did you roll your own file system to replace Dropbox?
Yeah. So this is something that we've been working on for actually a couple years now, and I think we're going to roll it out relatively soon. I can't actually promise a release date or anything like that, but it's very close. We've been beta testing it, and everything seems to work fine. While Dropbox was a great way to get Blend built quickly and test the idea and see if this was actually something that worked for people, there are a number of limitations and things that I think having a little more control over the storage layer and what's going on client side and that sort of thing can be improved.
I imagine there's also conversion drop off when it's connect your Dropbox, and users are like, well, I don't want to do that.
Yeah, exactly. For sure. I mean, yeah, there's definitely it's kind of it's a point in the funnel that people get stuck at. It's a source of confusion sometimes in terms of, how exactly do you put the things in there? Going back to what we talked about earlier about bouncing out these rendered wave tracks from your DAW session. That's really important to do so that other musicians that are collaborating with you on Blend can hear the result of the music, and without actually opening up in a DAW and making sure they have all the plugins, they can actually hear a preview of what this project sounds like and see if it's interesting to them and something they want to collaborate on. But a lot of these DAWs don't automate that for you necessarily. So people will forget to add those audio previews, or they'll forget that they're actually using a proprietary plugin of some sort that they didn't mean to use, that's basically going to cause problems for collaborators. So Ableton has this little collect all and save thing, which you're supposed to remember to do to sort of pull all of the samples that you've used from your own personal sample library into the project itself. So you do collect all and save, and then you go to Blend and you publish the project. A lot of people forget to do collect all and save. And then that means that, when you pull one of these projects, you're like, oh crap, all the samples are missing. I can't really do anything with that. So it's something that we'd like to, actually warn people about earlier in the process, before they're even publishing. Say oh, hey, there's actually some missing samples, or maybe just turn on an option to automatically, pull in those samples when you're publishing, so you don't have to worry about it.
I have been aggravated by FL Studio so many times over the years where I change my operating system or something and I save my FL Studio files in the wrong way, and I don't realize that the samples are soft links or some kind of soft link. And then I open up my FL Studio song a couple months later, and it's looking for the sample, cannot find the sample. I'm like, well, great, that's in the operating system that I reformatted, and it's gone forever. And that is just that's so heartbreaking. But I mean, I think that was in a pre-Dropbox era. And now I think my workflows take care of that. But
right, so you store your samples, all of your samples in Dropbox separately at this point.
At this point, I do. Although I don't think I have that Dropbox file synced with my digital audio workstation, which is a really sloppy state of affairs. But I'm sure it's not the sloppiest state of affairs of electronic musicians out there. Mm-hmm. So, can you talk at all about the Dropbox replacement you built? So I did a show a while ago actually about Dropbox. I mean, this is kind of meta, but Dropbox moving off of S3, because they recently moved off of Amazon. They moved to their own data center, and it was funny because they had to rebuild all of the functionality that S3 gave them. They had to rebuild basically their own S3. So I'm wondering if you had to do something similar, or if you moved to S3 and then you had to build Dropbox tooling on top of that.
I mean, that was a really interesting development, I thought. I mean, we watch Dropbox very closely because we depend on them, for all of our storage stuff. And, everything about that migration was interesting, I thought. The way that they developed, new custom hardware, and the way that they actually tested things, and the way that they cut over. I mean, like, it's kind of, it boggles the mind to even imagine that you can do that. So, I actually think Dropbox is a really, really great sync client. I mean, compared to all the sync clients that are out there.
Oh yeah.
I think
it was so funny because around this time where they were migrating, there were so many people that were just saying, "Oh, Dropbox, like they don't even come out with a new feature in 2 years, blah 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 blah." And then they come out with this big article, and it's like, "Yeah, we spent the last 2 years moving off of the cloud." And I was like, "Well, okay, that silences the doubters."
Right. I mean, that was a major engineering effort for sure. So, I mean, when we initially looked at like replicating what Dropbox had built, we were obviously pretty daunted by that, and it definitely like gave us pause, in considering like whether or not we even wanted to get into that game. What gave us some optimism about doing it is that the sort of file access patterns that musicians have are very different from general purpose file access patterns, and that allowed us to kind of say, okay, we don't need to build something that is really fancy and can handle all of these general purpose use cases. We just need something that works for musicians. So, like if you've got an Ableton project, for instance, you have a .als file, which is your sort of session file, and then it references all these other files like, samples and plugins and stuff. The samples and plugins don't really change. You've got
true.
These assets.
Yeah.
You've got these assets on disk, and you're transforming them in the DAW. Maybe you're clipping them, or like running them through any number of filters, but the actual source files there aren't changing. So like once they're in your project, they're just kind of immutable. So you don't really have to worry about like, oh gosh, what happens when someone updates something in the middle of this gigantic file. So we didn't really have to. We actually measured this for a couple of years, and we realized people weren't actually changing large assets in place or anything. So we didn't have to do what Dropbox does, which they actually do, a block based content data store with deduplication and all that stuff. We could get away with something a little simpler.
So were you looking to save space, or were there some kind of primitives that you're trying to create for some other reason?
I mean, it was really the simplicity of it that sort of drove our approach to blend sync. Essentially, once you sync one of these large WAV files to cloud storage, you're not usually going to have to worry about updating it in place. So you don't really have to optimize for that scenario.
Okay. So I'd love to talk more about, so can you talk any more about that process? Like, because if you have to build your own Dropbox, are there, it's a Dropbox for music, basically. What are the other kinds of file synchronization issues that you have to build, or like race conditions, or like, I just hear about all these nightmare scenarios that Dropbox had to solve for. I'm just very curious if you had to build anything similar, or if it was on S3 and a lot of those things got factored out and you just had to think more about the music level problems.
Right. So we are using S3 as the cloud storage for this. This is the thing that we built on top of S3. So that layer of things is taken care of. We don't have to worry about, physically provisioning, file servers and redundancy and all that kind of stuff. Which, having that sort of physical layer taken care of by someone else is definitely something I think we want to keep. In terms of like kind of the sort of tricky sync scenarios you can get into, the other interesting thing is like, you're a coder and I'm a coder, and probably most people listening to this are coders, and we probably all use Git and GitHub and stuff. And we've probably, I would just hazard a guess, most people listening have resolved a merge conflict at some point. And so, it's for the vast majority of developers, it's a kind of still an unpleasant, scary thing, when a merge conflict happens. And, especially if you're trying to get something else done, it just sort of gets in the way, and, it's sometimes really not even clear how to proceed, because you have to look at the intent on either side of the merge and make sure that you're resolving the intent.
And it's always Friday at 5 p.m.
And it's always Friday at 5 p.m. And there's really no tool that can help you. Like, this is a problem that a human has to solve by like looking and determining intent. So, kind of how I like talked about like, just looking at what musicians specifically need and sort of making simplifying assumptions about that. This was another place that we were able to make a simplifying assumption. And I think Dropbox has also made the same simplifying assumption, at least maybe in the common case, is that you don't really have to worry about file conflicts if you're not giving people access to a shared folder. So on Dropbox, you can obviously like share a folder with someone else, and then you can both overwrite things inside there, and that's where Dropbox starts doing the revision thing. And they actually do have like conflict resolution facilities in there. They'll like,
yes, it copies your folders.
Yeah, it's kind of like the .orig.rej thing that happens when a patch fails to apply. You go in there and you look at the two different versions, you compare side by side, and you figure out what to do. So if we can avoid situations where people actually are modifying that same exact file, then we can kind of avoid these issues. So the way Blend works is that you and your collaborators are not editing the same file. You are basically forking versions that each of you has published, and versions are kind of immutable once they've been published.
Got it.
If you get in a situation where like you've made some changes and published them as a project, and they've made some changes and published them as a separate forked project, then if you actually wanted to merge those changes together, that's something that you would do by hand. You basically you can pull both projects and drag and drop things in between, but some of these types of merge conflicts they're so hard to resolve in the context of like DAWs with binary files flying around that it's not even worth trying to build a tool that helps people do that. It's better to just give people access to the raw materials, and then they can do what they need to do.
Right. Okay. But so now I think I get what you're saying about the primitives, where basically if you can figure out these essentially commonalities between each version of a song as people are saving them, then it becomes much cheaper to build an append-only file system to where every update is just an append, and it's very easy to roll back.
Pretty much, yeah. In the Dropbox era, we have really leveraged, that sort of immutability. And then with Blend Sync, this new storage system that we're rolling out along with a client, leveraging the immutability aspect even harder. So yeah, basically, if people aren't overwriting the same files, then you don't get into those situations. You still might need to, in future provide some tooling to let people sort of merge stuff together. But, doing that even like for one particular DAW is a pretty daunting task. So yeah, it's pretty much on you as the user to resolve those situations, or to just sort of collaborate a little bit differently so that they don't arise.
Okay, let's talk about the front end. The front end, like I said, has a similar social network feel to Facebook. There's likes, there's a feed, there's a place to post at the top. You can post a project, you can ask a question, you can post a tip. There also are features like a marketplace. There's some other different news feeds. What did you use to build the front end?
So Blend was started, I'm going to have to get my history right. I think 2013, Blend was launched. The front end, at that point, it was Jade for templates, Stylus for CSS, and then just essentially jQuery soup.
Oh.
I'm sure when it was initially built, this is 2013, right? So,
yeah,
there wasn't a clear successor to any of that. And I'm sure,
Well, there was Rails, right?
Well, there was Rails, but in terms of what do you do on the front end?
Oh, okay, of course.
If you want these rich interactions.
Of course, okay.
People were still using jQuery.
Wasn't there Backbone, Angular?
Yeah, people were starting to get into that stuff. I mean,
That was the nascent days.
exactly. Like Backbone and Angular were definitely still there. Obviously Angular 2 it just came out, and React was just a twinkle in someone's eye.
Right. Oh, so is it still built with that stuff? I mean, I know you have it's a small team. Like, I know you're focused on this back end sync stuff. Do you have intentions to move to something like React?
We did actually about a year and a half ago. We moved the core project publishing experience. So that's blend.io/projects. When you go there, you see like a list of all the projects that you've got in your Blend Dropbox folder, and you can publish them or preview them, or it's basically the core of the Blend publishing experience. And that was a jQuery soup, and then we rewrote it in React.
Oh.
And I think, this was, a year and a half ago, React was pretty immature, but I think even then it was already a pretty big win in terms of just being able to go in and modify those components and reason about them and stuff.
And there is a unbelievable amount of enthusiasm behind that project.
Tell me about it. So for Blend Sync, we have a client that's built in Electron. So it's cross-platform. It runs on Windows and Mac OS. It runs on Windows and Mac OS, and it actually runs on Linux too, because I use Linux, but don't tell anyone that just yet. But it's a cross-platform, like a little sync client that gives you some other nice hooks into Blend. And yeah, it uses React in the front end, and it uses Electron for, the bones.
So that Blend Sync client, that is unreleased at this point?
Unreleased at this point,
okay.
But check back soon, I guess.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm looking forward to using that. So I can use my FL Studio stuff, and I can use a Blend Sync client on my Windows machine, and I can sync with I guess I could sync with if I wanted to do stuff between FL Studio and Ableton, maybe I could interop with my Windows machine, or I could just interop with another friend who's on a Mac using Ableton, and use that sync client just as our collaboration space, right?
Right. So, I mean, it's a little tray app. And it gives you like a heads up view of your most recently modified projects. And, once you pull up the little tray window, you can hit publish on one of them. You can see what remix contests and things are being run on Blend. There's always
awesome.
New ones, and it gives you a little notifications tab too. So, Blend has a lot of the features of a social network. It has messaging and follows and liking and things like that. So you can see those notifications in a tab. So you don't necessarily have to fully leave the comfort of your DAW and go over to the Blend world. You've kind of got this thing in between that handles file syncing, and it also just gives you like a really compact interaction with Blend.
As an engineer, I'm focused on the functionality of my application. Can users upload cat photos to my app? Can users see each other's cat photos that are being uploaded? I am more focused on building new features than things like security or error-free code. And now I don't have to choose between new features and things like security. Codescope JAX helps JavaScript developers secure their source code as they build applications. JAX analyzes your GitHub repository as you are building an application, and it finds areas of your code that can be improved, whether that is a security issue or some kind of error. Go to codescope.com/sedaily today to get free usage of Codescope JAX. That's CODISCOPE.com/sedaily. You can get free usage of JAX on an unlimited number of repositories. My JavaScript applications are usually throwing off all kinds of errors that I keep telling myself I will fix, but I never get around to fixing them. There are frameworks and tools that are changing so quickly. I don't know what security risks I might be ignoring in my application. At codescope.com/sedaily, you can try out Codescope Jax, and it will teach you to write better JavaScript. Thanks to Codescope for being a new sponsor of Software Engineering Daily. So I recently checked out Blend. I don't remember why I clicked on it or why I found it, but I saw the remix contest for Havoc, who is one half of the rap group Mobb Deep, and I'm a huge fan of their music. And so, like, I obviously entered that remix contest, and like, I just had so much fun with that. I don't know. I did not expect to have so much fun, but it was really enjoyable. And
yeah, that's awesome and so cool that the guy, had this unpublished vocal track, and he's like, sure, I'll just throw it up there and see what people do with it.
Is that the most popular project that you've seen on Blend?
No. Actually, the most popular project, popularity, there's different metrics for that, right? But the most popular project is the Ableton Berkeley course.
Oh, of course.
Assignment number 1. Yeah. So a lot of people discovered Blend through that. And it's a fantastic online course if you're getting into, digital music making, and you want to learn more about Ableton. You can basically just hop on Blend, pull that project, and it kind of walks you through the basics of stuff. And Aaron Barra, the musician who produced the course, is really great.
Explain how that course worked. How did it leverage Blend?
Well, essentially, you've got like your course on Coursera, and you do your submit assignments and maybe ask questions, and Coursera handles some stuff as well. But in order to actually like submit your assignments, you just publish them on Blend. So you essentially fork, in Blend parlance, pull. You fork the assignment 1 project. You make the modifications that they want you to do in that first assignment, and then you publish it, and then someone actually reviews it.
Cool. Okay, that's really cool. So it is the collaborative work environment between students and teachers for music production. So the front end that is sort of like a SoundCloud, it's like a feed of tracks that you can play. Do you have to prefetch those audio files so that they load quickly? I don't think we ever looked into that. It was one of those, like, if it becomes a noticeable issue, we're going to optimize it. But until then, don't prematurely optimize. They are streamed, so obviously you're not loading the entire MP3 before it starts to play. Yeah. So you've worked on the newsfeed algorithms and the social graph of Blend.io. What kinds of things have you worked on that fall under that purview? What what kinds of things are you calculating on the fly when a user logs in, and what are you doing in terms of batch processing on? Because you have to create a news feed for each user, and there's this big complicated social graph. There's all these different interactions with music going on. How did you build that?
Well, I think the initial so there's 2 different ways to do like a timeline or a feed. You can do push or you can do pull, and I think at some scale, then you kind of have to do push. Mm-hmm. So Twitter operates at push, and Instagram operates at push. In terms of like a fan out model, basically, like, when I publish a photo, there's actually a physical message or notification that gets fanned out to everyone that's following me. And then their timelines are basically built off, the sequence of messages that has arrived for them. So Blend initially, and I think this is probably the easier way to build a feed from the get-go, because it's more flexible. It's basically just an algorithm that is calculated on the fly when you load that /feed page.
Okay, so it's pull for now.
So it's pull for now.
Right. So longer term, if there's significant scale in the newsfeed area, We just did a show about event sourcing. I don't know if you know the event sourcing pattern, but have you heard of that?
Yep.
Yeah. Is that how the push-based feed kind of works, where a user does something like listens to a song or likes something, and that registers as an event in the system, and then that event propagates to the queue, the event queue, and then goes off of that event queue to update all of the feeds of all the people that are listening to it, all of the subscribers that would be listening to that event. That sounds like a way that you could do the push-based news feed.
Exactly, and that's kind of what I'm alluding to with the sort of fan out.
Mm-hmm.
The difficulty there is that if you want to change, for instance, what things get fanned out and what things don't, or decide that some activity is just not important enough to show in the feed, then you've got, all this state sitting there that you have to maybe eliminate or correct or hide or something. So I think it's easier for people when you're initially building a feed to just, run a query that gives you all the data for the feed, and then you can change that query, that algorithm, when you need to. In the blend case, it was kind of like that from day one. We use Mongo on the back end, so there's some pretty wild Mongo aggregate queries that happen when you load your feed. But soon after joining Blend, I spent a lot of time just optimizing the heck out of that thing. So those queries run fast, and they don't have to grab things that you don't need, and so you're not waiting seconds for your feed to load or something. So
yeah, well, it seems like it's kind of unique for a social network, because it does feel like I do like the GitHub analogy, because it's more like you mostly go to Blend to do some kind of thing that has to, like, you go to the site to do sometimes you'll probably go there to socialize and to interact with other users, but a large part of the draw is it's the utility, and you're doing something with it just kind of intermittently, and then you're going back to your digital audio workstation to keep working on music. So it seems like, building in, addictive loops and stuff into the newsfeed algorithms in the social graph, it's not as necessary to make Blend.io do what it needs to do.
No, and we did a little bit of that. If you've had Blend.io/feed open for any period of time, you've probably noticed that it does actually notify you when new feed stories appear. The way it does that is just by polling, though. So. But yeah, it. When I joined, the feed was kind of, I guess I would say, just not that interesting, and the noise was pretty high relative to the signal. In particular, one of the problems that you'd have if you just had it be just like a purely event-based feed would be like, oh, so and so followed Moby, and so and so's brother followed Moby, and everyone's dog followed Moby. It'd just be like. That'd be like all your news stories. Moby's on Blend, by the way. All your news stories, were just kind of the same thing. Like once something would blow up, it would just kill your feed. So one of the first things we did was do roll up on those, basically on the object of the story. There's subjects. Jeff followed Moby. Jeff would be the subject. Moby would be the object in that sort of sentence. So we did essentially like aggregate roll-ups on the object. So everyone who followed Moby would just get sort of lumped into the same news story. Jeff, Alan, and 354 other people followed Moby.
Right.
So that made the signal to noise ratio much better. Just that one change.
Sure. Have you talked to Moby about how he uses Blend?
I think by the time I was working on Blend, he was off doing other things, although we might be doing another feature with him. It's kind of still a potential thing, but yeah. I think it's interesting that when he published his projects, he actually took the time to publish them in 4 different formats. So if you're a Logic user, you've got a Logic project for it. If you're an Ableton user, you've got that.
Oh, wow, what a generous guy.
Totally.
Man, I heard him on some podcasts recently. He's quite an entertaining speaker, too.
Yeah.
So, what do you think we're headed towards a time where collaborative music making is going to be a little in wider adoption, because it is interesting that it's just not widely done. You see collaboration in all kinds of other projects, management thingies, and I think you mentioned you're a musician too. I'm sure this must have been aggravating you as much as it aggravates me, that it is freaking hard to find people to collaborate with on electronic music, and it seems like it should be so easy.
Right. Well, I mean, it's hard to find people to collaborate with in person as well, to find someone that you're, comfortable jamming with.
Who doesn't flake.
Yeah. I mean, when I lived in New York, it was almost impossible to find someone and, line up the times and, make sure that both people were interested. And, by the time you just like finish setting it up, it was just like, oh, you'd already done so much work. Not to mention sorry to interrupt you, but not to mention the fact that the way that we worked with music now, like the digital audio workstation thing, to me is a somewhat solo experience. Like to be in the same place, in the same room, working on something. Yeah, okay, maybe it makes sense for the chain smokers and makes sense for some other groups of people, but for me, it's become more like a coding type of thing, which is not to say that you don't want to collaborate with other people, but the remote collaboration thing is the ideal workflow from my point of view. Yeah, and I mean, the bedroom producer thing has there's been a huge uptick in that, and part of it's tooling, and part of it's also just the internet. Really, like it's actually possible. I have Google Fiber now here in Utah, and I have a friend who lives that I play music with in person sometimes. But we're already thinking, even though we live a few blocks away, about like he's got Google Fiber, I've got Google Fiber. The latency is probably good enough that we could just, just do this through our laptops. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm sorry, but I interrupted you. Like, where do you think this stuff is going? Like, is it going to be? What are the in your experience talking to people who are using this stuff? What are the barriers to this being more pervasive?
Well, I think this is a really interesting time for the music industry as a whole. Some people are really pessimistic on the state of the industry. Some people are just really optimistic, and I think there's kind of it's a really chaotic, creative time. The industry is sort of reinventing itself, and the way we make music and listen to music is radically changing. I think. We at Blend and Rolly, the parent company of Blend, we've kind of been looking at this Instagram phenomenon. Like if you think back to 10 years ago, there was like professional photographers, and then there was everyone else. And like you wouldn't just call yourself a professional photographer or even a photographer. If you're just a normal person, you had to have all this gear and training, and it was really unapproachable. And not very many people felt like they could do it. And then Instagram came along, and all of a sudden it made it relatively easy and accessible for people to publish photography that they felt good about and that actually looked pretty good. And I think that's going to happen for music too. I think there's going to be an Instagram for music. And we are actually working on that at Rolly.
Interesting. Okay. So a separate app. So that makes so much sense, because Instagram made these really easy to use filters, the idea of a filter, and these things that are basically in Photoshop, they're impossible to approach unless you're really good with Photoshop. They kind of reworked the UI and made it super simple. You can see the same thing happening to music, where look, a chord progression, like music theory is somewhat indecipherable to outsiders, and but if you look at it from a scientific point of view, like you can see that this isn't like this. You can systematically break this down. You can systematically break down music theory. You can there's very simple things you can do in terms of mixing. Like you can just say, okay, click the little. Click the toggle for, do you want compression or not? Like you don't have to necessarily have a slider, or you could even have a slider, I guess, but have all of the settings on the slider be be good settings. You don't have to have these little areas where if you misconfigure something, it ends up crappy. Like, it's really hard to make, like, Instagram pushes you to basically, like, anything you add or subtract, it still looks good, which you could totally see happening.
Right. They've highly optimized the experience to be really, really accessible to, amateur creators. And I don't think that's been done yet in music. I think, and that's going back to what you were asking about, like talking to people about making music. I think there is that in music, that sort of same divide that was there in photography, where it's like people just, they're almost ashamed. They're like, oh, I'm not a musician.
Right.
And then when you ask them, they're like, oh, well, I was in choir, I was in band.
Yeah.
Or like, I play guitar now, or, like everyone kind of is a musician. It's just that they don't think of themselves as a musician because they don't have much to show for it, and they're not really connected to a larger ecosystem, and they don't have these sort of tools that give them confidence. But I totally think that's going to happen.
Oh, that is an optimistic world. I like that a lot. Just because I get so much pleasure out of writing music, and I know that the people I know who write a lot of music get so much pleasure out of it too. And the rare times where I've actually had a collaboration work, that pleasure is, exponentially raised. And I would love to see more people be able to engage with that.
It's such a wonderful feeling. And I think that music even could potentially go beyond, beyond what you can do with photography, because people don't really remix photos, like, yeah, you might be able to, and, it kind of happens, there's memes and things like that. But, it's your Instagram feed is kind of like, it's read only, you're throwing things into it that you can write, but like, you're not really remixing other things. And I think, music potentially is very different. It's very exciting to remix things and to feel like, you took an idea and elaborated on it. And, I remember my first experience on Blend when I published a project, and, I used Bitwig, and I was just learning Bitwig, and it's really basic and not very good, but someone actually pulled it, and then they did a totally different take on it. It was kind of like a Middle Eastern style, like they went in a different direction. And like, when I got that notification that someone had, remixed my project, it was just the coolest feeling,
Yeah. Absolutely. So now I'm connecting the dots. So you've built this primitive file system for append-only music forking and version control and stuff, and then you can just use that as the backend for whatever the Instagram for music that you're building is.
Correct. Yeah. So, we're taking a lot of the lessons that we've learned on Blend. We're still, developing Blend, and, this sync client is coming out soon and all that stuff. But we've taken a lot of the lessons that we've learned on Blend, and we're applying them to things we're building with Rolly now. And Rolly is an interesting company because they do hardware as well. So I think that's also an interesting kind of dimension to consider things in terms of, is like, you have music hardware, and the music hardware has been very disconnected up until pretty recently. Now, musicians can use Ableton, and like, at least there's some facility for, publishing and collaborating and stuff. But it's like, it's kind of not very well vertically integrated. So really, I think, the future is bright if you can, make awesome music hardware that has awesome music software associated with it, and then also hooks into like an awesome collaborative platform online, sort of, like a fully integrated music creation and collaboration experience.
Definitely. Okay, so just to wrap up, I enjoyed looking at your LinkedIn profile on doing the preparation for the show, because it was like you spent like 8 months at a big company, and then 1 year at another big company, and then like 3 or 4 years consulting, and then a bunch of startups. And it's so wide-ranging. You have a really wide-ranging background. You've got networking stuff, you've got embedded systems, there's some NLP and machine learning, and now music technology. So of all the things that you could work on, why have you wound up in the music tech space?
Well, I think I kind of found my home eventually. It took me a while to realize that I really like startups and small companies. And it kind of took me a while to figure out that, I like programming or writing software in certain areas more than others. That's not to say like I necessarily prefer like front-end development or back-end development or embedded development to one thing or the other, but I think it does matter, what you're building. If you're actually passionate about that, it's a reason to wake up and just kill it every day. And I think for the past 5, 6, 7 years, I've been working on sort of the confluence of tech and art, and I think that's a really awesome place to be. It's really fun.
Sure is. Okay, Alan, thanks for coming on the show. I have really enjoyed this conversation, and I encourage any listeners to check out Blend, and I am eager to see what you come out with next.
All right. Yeah, well, stay tuned. Watch this space.
Thanks to Symfano for sponsoring Software Engineering Daily. Symfano is a custom engineering shop where senior engineers tackle big tech challenges while learning from each other. Check it out at symphano.com/sedaily. That's SYMPHONO.com/sedaily. Thanks again, Symfano.